Today, I publish my report into the maternity and neonatal services at Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust. It is a report that my team and I did not want to have to write. It is a report that the families of Nottingham should never have needed. But it is a report that had to be written because what happened here in Nottingham cannot be allowed to remain in the shadows. And because the women, babies, and families at the centre of these pages deserve, at the very least, the truth. This review was commenced in September 2022. It covers maternity and neonatal care at NUH mostly between 2012 and 2025, but with some cases going back to the merger of the Trust in 2006. More than 2,500 families came forward to share with my team what happened to them. Let that number sit with you for a moment. 2,500 families. Their experiences occurred over more than a decade, and yet the themes that run through those experiences, a failure to listen, a failure to investigate, a failure to learn, are hauntingly consistent. From 2012 to 2025, year after year, baby after baby, mother after mother, family after family. This review owes its very existence to a group of families who refused to be silenced. They came together in harm and in grief, united in their determination that what had happened to them should not happen to anyone else. I want to name them. Harriet Hawkins and her parents Sarah and Jack. Winter Andrews and her parents Sarah and Gary. Quinn Parker and his parents Emmy Studenki and Ryan Parker. Cooper Needham and his parents Natalie and David. Teddy and his mum Kimberly Errington. Caitlin Stringer and her parents Emily and Darryl. And Felicity Benyon. These were the families who stood up with considerable courage. Without them, this review would not exist. Without them, Nottingham might still be enduring similar tragedies. I want to address directly the families in this room and those watching today. You came to us with the most painful accounts of your lives. You allowed us into your grief, and you trusted us with the names and the faces and the unfinished futures of the people you love. I hope that this report, however hard it is to hold, tells you that you were heard, that you were believed, and that your voices now carry weight that will outlast all of us in this room. I also want to say something clearly at the outset about what this report is. This report is about what happens when leadership fails, when governance fails, when a culture develops in which bullying is tolerated, concerns are suppressed, incidents are downgraded, and the voices of women, particularly the most vulnerable women, are systematically dismissed. We heard from so many current and former staff at NUH. Many of the clinical staff who worked in maternity services cared deeply. They were often working in conditions that were chronically understaffed, under-resourced, and under enormous pressure over a very long time. This is a report about a system that failed, and it is a report about what it costs when systems fail. It costs lives, it costs futures, and it costs families everything. It has to be recognised that part of that failing system were the professional regulators who have had a long-term role to play in the harm caused to these families. In fact, erosion of trust in the regulators of doctors, midwives, and nurses has been a very specific feature of the experience of Nottingham families. Families have said they were knocking on a closed door and they were facing a brick wall. They spent years trying to be heard while poor practice continued, with the professional voice being believed over that of families for years. Before I turn to the detail of what is in this report, I want to set it in its national context, because Nottingham does not exist in a vacuum. A pledge was made in 2015 to reduce the rates of stillbirths and maternal deaths in England by 50% by 2030. We are not on track. Stillbirths, whilst reduced over recent years, remain above pre-COVID pandemic levels. Maternal deaths are at a 20-year high. And the women most at risk, women living in the most deprived communities and black women, continue to die at rates that are a national scandal. That disparity is well known, but it has not narrowed. It must be addressed and not merely acknowledged. Clinical negligence costs the NHS almost as much in legal compensation as it spends on delivering maternity care itself. According to a recent NHS Resolution annual report, 51% of the total negligence costs of harm, £2.5 billion, relates to maternity. That isn't just a financial figure. Behind every pound of that number is a family whose life was changed, often irreparably. Safe, equitable maternity care is not a luxury. It is a fundamental obligation of a civilised health service, and we are not yet consistently delivering it. Before I take you through the main findings of this report, on behalf of the families, I would like to thank two very important groups of people. Firstly, members of Parliament who have supported families, their constituents, in some cases for over 10 years. And secondly, journalists Your support of families in this review has meant the world to them. Both of these groups of people have walked an extremely long journey alongside affected families. They will remember forever your kindness, your compassion, your expertise, and most importantly, your belief in them. So let's move on to an overview of what is in this report. Between 2012 and 2025, my team examined 2,511 family cases within scope. Of those, my team assessed each case for the quality of care received, grading cases as good or appropriate care through minor concerns to significant concerns to major concerns where different care might reasonably have altered the outcome. Beyond the formal cohort, 533 additional families whose cases fell outside our terms of reference also came forward with accounts of their care. They too have been heard, and their experiences inform our wider understanding of a service that over a long period failed the people it existed to serve. The findings from the cases in the main terms of reference show that in 21% of cases where mothers died, 26% of cases where mothers experienced a major obstetric hemorrhage, 36% of cases where a mother had an unplanned admission to intensive care, 20% of cases involving a mother's care when a baby was stillborn, 50% of a mother's care when a baby suffered hypoxic brain injury. My team found significant or major concerns in care where different or better care may have made a difference to the outcome. The figures that underpin these failings are stark, and they are presented in full in the report. At the heart of this report are the testimonies of women and their families. Throughout the review process, we have had contact with thousands of families. We listened to accounts of antenatal, labour, birth and postnatal care, neonatal care, bereavement, and the experience of trying to raise concerns and complaints. What emerges from those testimonies consistently and painfully across more than a decade is a pattern of families not being listened to, not being believed, and being dismissed or minimised. Women who raised concerns about their baby's movement or their baby's lack of growth being told they were anxious and imagining it. Women who attended in early or advanced labour being turned away repeatedly, often after multiple calls for help, by staff who should have cared. Women and their families who begged for caesarean sections to have them denied repeatedly. We don't do caesarean sections for grandmother's distress, the mother of a woman in labour was acidly told. Their baby, Sebastian, died. Women whose consent was not sought or not respected during labour. Women who described interactions in the labour or antenatal ward that I can only characterise as cruel. They were screaming at me, "You need to pull yourself together." That is a direct account from a woman in labour in 2014. In 2018, a mother was told, "You have to wait your turn, you're not important, there's other women here." Throughout the review, my team found examples of what they described as normalization of deviance. This occurred when there were significant concerns that should have led to intervention, but the quest for normal birth continued, and avoidance of intervention persisted, often with tragic outcomes. These are not isolated incidents, but were representative of a pattern, and that pattern caused long-term harm, because women who were not listened to were women whose concerns were not escalated and acted upon. And some of those women and some of those babies are no longer here or suffered severe harm. I want to say something specific about bereavement care, because the testimonies in this area are amongst the most difficult in the report. Some families received extraordinary support from bereavement midwives and chaplains who understood that their role in those moments was extremely sensitive and central to care. I am so grateful to those staff. What they gave to families in their darkest hours was immeasurable. But many families described something very different: being left in a labour ward to grieve, listening to other babies being born, other families celebrating, being told, literally told, when according to staff it was time to give their baby back, "I think you've had enough time with her now." Bereaved mothers describing the absence of cold cots to give them more time with their baby, of bereavement midwives not returning calls, and of forgotten follow-up care. There was no bereavement midwife available, and no follow-up care, no counselling, not even a phone call to check we were okay. Families who left the hospitals alone, walking to their car through the maternity unit with no one beside them. A mother described to me being left to sink or to swim. As regards after-death care, inpatient care does not end and must continue when a patient dies. They remain a patient until they are discharged from the hospital, usually through transfer to their family's chosen funeral director via the hospital mortuary. It has been said the care with which our dead are treated is a mark of how civilised a society we are. The report chapter on post-death care contains findings from the review of 18 cases at NUH where issues were identified with the post-death care given to babies, a mother who had died, or to people who had been bereaved. These cases were in the review because they met the terms of reference. Concerns were raised directly with the review team by families. Where there are shortcomings in the post-death care of patients, their dignity can be severely impacted. All of the cases reviewed by my team involved a loss of dignity to a greater or lesser extent. The first very serious case the review became aware of occurred in 2016, that of the complete failure of the after-death care and treatment of Harriet Hawkins, and concerns have continued to the current time. In 2016, after death, a baby was placed into a mortuary space already occupied by an unknown and unrelated adult patient. Although there was no physical harm to either patient, both suffered a loss of dignity. The baby's family were not informed until 2026. This practice was significantly below expected standards in 2016. In 2019, a very early gestation baby was inadvertently disposed of as clinical waste by laboratory staff. This led to a complete loss of dignity for the baby and significant distress for the baby's parents as it went against their express wishes. We didn't want our baby to be disposed of. That was the thing we didn't want. Families have told the review team of inappropriate language used by NUH staff, such as fetus, sample, and specimen. This has and had a really dehumanizing effect. Our baby is just a fetus in the NUH report, but it was our baby. We planned to have that baby. In 2022, there was a very serious incident involving the release of the wrong baby to a funeral director. Fortunately, the error was identified by mortuary staff before a funeral took place, and the incorrect baby was returned to the mortuary. The report describes a no-notice regulation inspection of the mortuaries at NUH by the Human Tissue Authority in March 2026, this year, which identified 10 shortfalls, 3 critical, 6 major, and 1 minor, against established standards for after-death care. These included standards for consent, governance and quality, traceability, and premises, facilities, and equipment. Further details can be found in the report. These are not just administrative errors or failures. They are failures of humanity. And we absolutely must have a service where compassion is integrated into the very heart of maternity care for all of the time someone is a hospital patient, including after their death. One of the most significant findings of this report concerns what happened, or rather what did not happen, when things went wrong. Between 2012 and 2024, my team identified a high proportion of cases that should have had a corresponding incident report, but had none. That is no record, no investigation, and no learning. Of those unreported cases, over 100 involved significant or major concerns in care. Serious incidents that were never classified as serious incidents. Families who were never told what had happened to them. Opportunities to prevent the next harm that were simply not taken. This was not accidental. The review team found persistent structural misapplication of incident grading. Harm was graded by perceived avoidability, not by outcome, meaning that if a death or injury could be characterized as unavoidable, it was less likely to be investigated and therefore less likely to result in learning. The logic in practice became, if we decide this couldn't have been prevented, we don't have to tell the family and we don't have to change. Hundreds of staff in Nottingham told my team what it felt like from the inside. They described a culture in which raising concerns was discouraged, and which obstetricians dominated governance meetings and determined whether incidents would be escalated or not, in which midwives were told to close it off, in which one clinician raised the same concern on 4 separate occasions, including in connection with the case of Winter Andrews, and was told each time it did not meet the threshold for a serious incident. Families who should have been told the truth were not told. Some found out only when they instructed lawyers very many years later, and some are still waiting. Running through all of this is a question of culture, and what the evidence shows is that at Nottingham, a toxic culture was allowed to take hold and was allowed to persist. A small number of powerful leaders described in both family and staff testimonies as having infected the unit, created an environment in which bullying was normalised, speaking up was dangerous, and governance was shaped by self-protection rather than patient safety. Midwives described being intimidated in governance meetings. Junior staff described to us being afraid to escalate. The incident review panel was described as intimidating, male-dominated, and dismissive of non-medical voices over very many years. Staff described to us leaving the trust because incidents were being brushed under the carpet. This is not, absolutely not, a reflection on all staff. There were, and continue to be, clinical staff at NUH who delivered excellent care under conditions of real adversity and who fought, sometimes at considerable personal cost, to raise concerns. They deserve acknowledgement and respect. But cultures are set by those at the top, and for too long, those at the top of this trust allowed a culture that prioritised institutional reputation over patient safety. This report also addresses clearly and with evidence the inequalities that shaped who was most harmed. Women from Black, Asian and other global majority backgrounds, women living in the most deprived areas of Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, women with mental health needs, women whose language was not English. These are amongst the women who faced the greatest barriers to being heard and who were most likely to have their concerns dismissed or minimised. My report sets out local actions for learning for Nottingham University Hospital specifically, and 8 areas of immediate and essential actions that apply to maternity services across England. These are not aspirational. They are essential and they must be implemented. They address listening to women and families as the foundation of everything associated with perinatal care. Perinatal workforce planning and funded safe staffing, without which no other improvement is possible. Training and multi-professional learning. Escalation and clinical oversight. Risk assessment throughout pregnancy. Incident investigation and family involvement. Governance and board accountability. Culture, teamwork, and psychological safety. At the heart of all of them is one clear principle, where women, families, or staff have ongoing concerns about a mother or baby, they must be able to seek an urgent, additional clinical review through clear, accessible, and responsive routes under the principles of Martha's Rule, in both hospital and in the community. The Maternal Care Bundle, published by NHS England in January 2026, provides a framework. The previous Ockenden Immediate and Essential Actions from the Shrewsbury and Telford report of 2022 were largely unimplemented. Many remain so today. I will not allow that to be the fate of these actions. I will be watching, and the families of Nottingham will be watching. And the families who come after them will be counting on all of the immediate and essential actions being implemented. There are some grounds for hope here in Nottingham. I want to be honest about this because it matters. Since 2022, there are signs of positive change at NUH. Incident grading and investigation has improved. Leadership is more visible. There is greater multidisciplinary learning. The service at NUH is not where it was. But it's not yet where it needs to be. And the progress that has been made must be sustained, deepened, and built upon. Culture change is slow and fragile. It must be protected, and improvement must be measured rather than assumed. In conclusion, a civilised health service will be judged not only by the excellence it achieves, but by the harm it prevents. In maternity care, where trust is absolute and vulnerability acute, families carry consequences that are measured across lifetimes. I have spent years now listening to what those consequences look like. I have heard parents describe milestones their children never reached. I have heard of relationships shattered, careers lost, mental health broken by what happened, and sometimes by what came after, when the truth was withheld and accountability was denied. There is a particular cruelty in preventable harm because it comes with the knowledge of what might have been. Not just the loss of life, which is devastating enough, but the loss of all that follows. The first day at school, the teenage arguments, the graduations, the weddings that will never happen, the grandchildren who will never exist. The lost years of what might have been, as we say in this report, had safe and appropriate care been provided. Safe maternity care is not complicated in its ambition. Women and their families come to maternity services with modest expectations: competence, honesty, timeliness, safety, dignity, and kindness. These are not high bars. They are the irreducible minimum that every woman in England deserves and has a right to expect. But we're not yet consistently providing it. We owe it to every mother, every baby whose terrible experiences are recorded in these pages to ensure that the failures described here are never repeated. The time for reflection and talking has passed. This must be a moment of collective action, sustained improvement, and renewed confidence in the perinatal care that women and babies in England will receive. The families of Nottingham have shown extraordinary courage, dignity, and determination in the face of the devastating consequences that continue to mark their lives. They came forward not for themselves alone, but so what happened to them could not happen to anyone else. Their voices must now become the catalyst for urgent, lasting national change. I firmly believe that safe, compassionate and equitable perinatal care is achievable in Nottingham and across England, but only if there is unwavering commitment at every level of the system to accountability, learning, transparency, and above all, to basic human kindness. We owe this to every one of the Nottingham families. I would ask you now, all of you in this room and all of you watching today, to join me in standing for a minute's silence for the mothers and babies who died, for those who live with the permanent consequences of harm, and for their families who carry what they carry every day and whose courage has brought us here today. Thank you.